point, we continue to explore author Heather McGhee's journey through the lens of her book, The Sum of Us.
As Danielle Wiggins explains, there's a modern-day push to desegregate our schools, which is starting to spread across Ohio.
The catalyst for self-reflection and change can come from any source, including this school talent show from the mid to late 1980s.
This was actually the moment where I was like, oh, hang on a second.
She's big, she's fat, she looks like a rat.
The boy on the left, in the black and blue shirt, is Andrew Lefkowits at 8 or 9 years old.
I was one of a small handful of white kids, the handful of white kids at the school.
For Andrew, watching himself in this old video reminded him of how going to a Denver public school with classmates of different races wasn't always an easy experience, but it was one he was thankful for because it prepared him for the real world.
It gave me a real different sense of the world, I think. I recognized as I entered spaces in the future, a comfort that I had being around people who are different from me.
He also thought of his daughters.
That was a moment where I was like, ooh, like I need my kids to be in an environment like that.
Andrew connected with Integrated Schools. It's a national grassroots movement started by the late Courtney McKitton, where white and/or privileged parents voluntarily send their kids to schools with a student body of mostly black and brown children. These parents say they're prioritizing integration as a way to advance equity in education for the well-being of all children and American democracy.
We live in a multiracial democracy. We want everyone to be able to work together to solve common problems that we all have. And I think there's a lot better chance of that happening if all of our kids go to school together.
Emily Brown is the co-leader of the newly formed Integrated Schools chapter in Columbus. She sends her children to their neighborhood public school. And although Emily says her family lives in a mostly white community, the school has a majority of black and brown students.
Many people in our neighborhood send their kids to private schools.
What's the problem? Well, in her book, The Sum of Us, Heather McGhee writes, the boom in private schools was a reaction to school integration in the 1950s and 60s after the landmark Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. McGhee cites research showing white students now make up 69% of K-12 private school enrollment, and the majority of public school students in the U.S. are now children of color.
Nobody I know goes to those schools.
I want my child to have academic peers.
It's just not a good fit for us.
Both McGhee and parents in the Integrated Schools movement argue an obstacle to modern-day integration is the narrative about good and bad schools.
When you think, like, close your eyes and imagine a good school, what you imagine is a largely white student body, lots of money, lots of resources. That is the vision of good school that kind of culture perpetuates.
In a webinar from 2020, Andrew, who is now on the Integrated Schools leadership team and hosts their podcast, explains how after Brown v. Board, white parents began to use race-neutral language in order to maintain white supremacy and segregation in schools.
White parents stopped saying, at least out loud, I don't want my kid to go to school with black kids. They started saying things like, I want my kid to learn a curriculum that's in line with my values.
Andrew admits he once believed that racial neutral narrative.
I had bought into this idea of risk, this idea that kind of I was going to set my kid up for failure, that I was going to harm them in some way. And so we thought, well, we better do what everybody says we should do, which is go to the good school.
But this talent show and what he was learning about integration allowed Andrew to pull his daughter out of the so-called good school and send her to the one he attended as a child.
When you look on any website that tries to rate schools, everything would say we moved from a great school to a terrible school. And that was not at all the experience we had. I mean, my kids are thriving, they are learning, they are growing.
And Andrew's daughter is performing on the exact same stage where he stood 30 years ago. The hope is that the sight of children from different races growing and learning in school together today will be the catalyst for producing positive change tomorrow.